Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, frustrated after another disappointing sexual encounter with her husband, Josh. She wanted to ask him, why does it always feel so rushed? Like we're just checking a box. But instead, she said, that was nice, and rolled over and went to sleep. Josh, oblivious to her disappointment, felt satisfied. He'd done all the things. He'd touched her, he'd kissed her. What more could she want? The silent disappointment happens in bedrooms everywhere. And the problem isn't that Josh didn't do foreplay, it's that he fundamentally misunderstood what foreplay actually is. Now, most of us learned that foreplay is what happens in the 15 minutes before sex. You kiss, you touch, you get aroused, you move to intercourse, check, 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 and done. But that's not actually how arousal works, especially for people with responsive desire patterns, which tends to be more common in women, but exists across both genders. What Elizabeth really wanted, what she couldn't quite articulate yet, wasn't an extra 10 minutes of touching before sex. She wanted connection throughout the entire day. The flirty text Josh could send to her at lunch, the way he might brush past her in the kitchen and whisper something playful in her ear, the moment when he asks her about a stressful situation and actually listens to the answer. Josh was treating foreplay like the opening act before the main event. Elizabeth was trying to figure out how to explain that the whole day is part of desire and anticipation. So it took Elizabeth a few weeks of feeling disconnected before she finally found the courage to bring it up. Not right after sex, but on a Saturday morning while they were making breakfast together. I need to tell you about something about our sex life, she started. Her heart was pounding. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just, I need more connection throughout the day, not just the 15 minutes before intercourse. Now, Josh's first reaction was to get defensive. I do try to connect with you. I ask about your day, and I always make sure you're warmed up before intercourse. I don't know what more you want from me. He felt criticized, like Elizabeth was saying he was failing as a husband. His defensiveness came from a place of hurt. He thought he was doing everything right, and now she was telling him it wasn't enough. Now, Elizabeth could have shut down at that point. She could have said, never mind, and just dropped it. But instead, she stayed in the conversation. I know you do, and I appreciate that. But what I'm talking about is different. It's not about adding more steps to foreplay. It's about feeling desired and pursued throughout the day, not just when you want to have sex. Now, that landed differently. Josh realized he only really paid attention to Elizabeth when he was hoping for sex that night. The rest of the time, he was just in his own head, thinking about work, scrolling on his phone, going through the motions. He wasn't actively pursuing her. He was just waiting for the right moment to initiate. Now, when Elizabeth gave him specific examples, the texts, the kitchen moments, actually listening when she talked about her day, something clicked for him. He realized he'd been treating foreplay like a transaction instead of connection. And that shift from defensiveness to understanding only happened because Elizabeth was brave enough to stay in the conversation when it got uncomfortable. So when Josh started sending Elizabeth a text mid-afternoon that said, can't stop thinking about you today, her body started paying attention. When he came home and immediately started helping with dinner while asking about her day, she felt seen. When he suggested they put the kids to bed early and take a bath together, she felt pursued. By the time they were actually touching each other sexually, Elizabeth's arousal had been building for hours. That's what foreplay throughout the whole day looks like. You're creating an atmosphere of desire and playfulness that carries through your normal life, not just those moments right before sex. But building that atmosphere throughout the day requires understanding that foreplay isn't just one thing. Most couples limit themselves to physical foreplay, touching, kissing, caressing. And while physical connection absolutely matters, there are actually 5 different types of foreplay that build arousal and connection. Physical foreplay is the obvious one. It's just not about grabbing body parts. It's that lingering hug in the morning, the shoulder massage while your spouse cooks dinner, the way you run your fingers through their hair while watching TV. It's intentional, affectionate touch that says, I want to be close to you without necessarily demanding sex. Emotional foreplay is about vulnerability and connection. Let me tell you about Brianna and Joel because they learned this lesson the hard way. They'd fallen into a pattern where Joel would try to initiate sex without any emotional connection beforehand. He'd been irritable at dinner, shut down when Brianna tried to talk about something important to her, and then suddenly wanted sex at bedtime. Now, Brianna felt like a vending machine. Put in the right physical coins, get sex out. But when they shifted their pattern, Joel started checking in with Brianna emotionally. He'd ask how she was really feeling, not just what tasks she got done during the day. He'd share his own struggles and fears. The vulnerability created safety, and safety is where desire grows. Experiential foreplay means doing things together. This isn't about creating elaborate date nights, though those are really nice sometimes. It's about shared experiences that create memories and inside jokes. So when Josh suggested he and Elizabeth try that new hiking trail, it wasn't directly sexual, but being outdoors together, laughing when they got a little lost, working together to figure out the trail map, all of that built connection, and connection fuels desire. Now, beyond just experiencing things together, you're also drawn to your spouse's mind. Intellectual foreplay might sound academic, but it's actually about engaging each other's minds. When you ask your spouse what they think about something that matters to them, when you have a genuine conversation about ideas that interest them, when you show curiosity about how they see the world, that's intellectually stimulating. Your spouse isn't just a body you're attracted to, they're a whole person with thoughts and perspectives that matter. And at the deepest level, there's spiritual foreplay. This doesn't mean you have to have identical beliefs or pray together before sex, though if that works for you, that's great. It just means connecting on the level of meaning and purpose. When you talk about what matters most to you, when you acknowledge the sacred nature of your connection, when you approach each other with reverence and respect, that builds a deeper intimacy that enhances your sexual connection. So when Elizabeth and Josh had that Saturday morning conversation, one thing that helped Josh understand was realizing that they'd been limiting themselves to just physical foreplay. So once he understood these five different types existed, he could see why Elizabeth felt disconnected. They weren't engaging as a whole person. So when they started experimenting with all five types, not as a checklist, but as a genuine way to connect, some days were more physical, some days were more emotional or intellectual, and the variety kept things interesting and ensured that they were connecting as whole people, not just bodies. Now, understanding the different types of foreplay is important, but there's something else that matters just as much. And it's something most people get completely wrong when it comes to the physical side. One of the biggest mistakes couples make is rushing through the physical part of foreplay like they're trying to get to the real thing. But when you rush the touching and caressing, you miss the entire point of arousal. So Joel used to approach the physical side of foreplay with Brianna like he was following a recipe. Step one, kiss. Step two, touch breasts. Step three, move hands lower. Step four, proceed to intercourse. He'd read somewhere that women want more foreplay than men, so he'd dutifully done these things for 15 or 20 minutes before trying to move to intercourse. And Brianna often felt nothing. She wasn't aroused. She was just waiting for him to finish the checklist so they could have intercourse and be done with it. And the problem wasn't that Joel was touching her wrong, it was that he was treating her arousal like a microwave instead of a slow cooker. He wanted to press some buttons and have her ready in 3 minutes. But arousal doesn't work that way. When they learned to slow down the physical part, everything changed. Joel started paying attention to Brianna's responses instead of following his mental script. When he kissed her slowly and felt her body relax into him, he stayed there longer instead of rushing to the next thing. When he caressed her skin and noticed her breathing change, he explored that more. He let intensity build naturally instead of trying to force it on a timeline. Now, starting slow and sensual, really allowing your bodies to warm up to each other, isn't just nice foreplay technique. It's how arousal actually works. Your nervous system needs time to shift from getting things done mode into pleasure and connection mode. So when you rush, you're asking your body to flip a switch that doesn't actually exist. And slowing down doesn't mean you can't have passionate, intense sex. It means you're letting that intensity build naturally through touch and physical connection. The difference between rushed physical foreplay and slow sensual buildup is like the difference between wolfing down a meal standing at the kitchen counter and sitting down to really savor each bite. One gets you to the end goal faster, but the other is far more enjoyable. Of course, slowing down only works if you're paying attention to what's actually happening. And that's where a lot of couples miss the mark. Even after Josh started understanding that foreplay needed to happen throughout the day and not just physically, Elizabeth still seemed disconnected sometimes, and he couldn't figure out why. The problem was that Josh was so focused on doing things correctly that he hadn't stopped paying attention to Elizabeth herself. He was following a script in his head instead of reading the room. One night, Josh was caressing Elizabeth in ways that usually aroused her, but her body was tense. Instead of powering through his plan, he paused. "You seem somewhere else," he said. "What's going on?" Now, Elizabeth admitted she was still thinking about a difficult conversation with her sister. Her body wasn't really ready for sexual connection. She needed emotional connection first. And that willingness to pause and check in to prioritize Elizabeth's actual experience over his plan for the evening made all the difference. They talked for about 20 minutes about what was bothering her. And then, when Elizabeth felt heard and understood, her body was actually able to shift into arousal. Now, reading the room means paying attention to whether both people are genuinely enjoying the process, not just tolerating it, not just going along with it, actually enjoying it. This is where all those sensory experiences come into play. When you're paying attention to multiple senses, touch, taste, sound, sight, scent, you're gathering information about your spouse's experience. You notice the sharp intake of breath. That means you found something that they like. You see the way their eyes close in pleasure. You hear the small sounds that tell you they're present and engaged. And when something isn't working, you adjust. You don't just keep doing what you had planned. You stay curious and responsive to what's actually happening in the moment. But even when you're reading the room and adjusting, there's another dynamic that can undermine your entire sexual connection. Brianna had been feeling undesired for months before she could finally articulate why. She told Joel, "I'm always the one who has to initiate. You never pursue me. I feel like you'd be fine if we never had sex again." Now, Joel was shocked. He wanted sex with Brianna, but he'd fallen into a pattern of being passive, waiting for her to make the first move and then just receiving what she offered. He wasn't actively pursuing her. He wasn't making her feel wanted and desired. So when couples get stuck in a pattern where one person always initiates, it creates an imbalance. The person who's always pursuing starts to feel like they're chasing someone who doesn't really want them. The person who's always receiving starts to feel pressure and obligation, and neither person feels truly desired. Better foreplay involves both people actively pursuing each other. This doesn't mean you're grabbing at each other all the time. It means you're both finding ways to say, "I want you, I desire you, I'm attracted to you." For Joel and Brianna, this shifted when Joel started initiating non sexual affection throughout the day without expecting it to lead anywhere. A kiss in the kitchen just because he wanted to kiss her, a compliment about how she looked with no ulterior motive. Those moments of pursuit helped Brianna feel desired, which ironically made her open up more to sexual connection. And crucially, both people's desire matter here. If Joel always wants one type of foreplay and never asks Brianna what she actually wants, he's not actually pursuing her. He's pursuing his own preferences and hoping she'll just go along with it. Real pursuit means caring about what brings your spouse pleasure and actively seeking to create those experiences. Now, as Elizabeth and Josh worked on those changes, they discovered something important about their physical foreplay patterns. They were both trying to give all the time, and neither one was truly receiving. Josh would touch Elizabeth, but he was so focused on her pleasure that he wasn't allowing himself to receive her touch in return. Elizabeth would try to pleasure Josh, but she was so busy performing and trying to do it right that she wasn't actually experiencing her own enjoyment of touching him. They were both givers with no receivers, which meant nobody was actually getting anything out of the experience. It wasn't until they started talking about it that they realized this pattern was making their sexual connection feel hollow and performative. So when they learned to take turns, truly take turns, everything improved. Sometimes Josh would focus entirely on Elizabeth's pleasure while she just practiced receiving without worrying about reciprocating, which was so hard to do. But she learned to be present in her own body and experience and to notice what felt good and to ask for what she wanted. Other times, Elizabeth would focus on Josh while he practiced receiving without immediately trying to turn it into a mutual pleasure. He learned to just let her explore his body, to communicate what felt good, and to be vulnerable in receiving. And sometimes they'd engage mutually, both giving and receiving simultaneously. But even in those moments, they check in that it wasn't just overly talking without also giving. Sometimes couples fill foreplay with so much conversation that they're not actually present in the physical experience. The talking becomes a way to stay in their heads instead of dropping into their bodies. And the balance of give and receive means both people get to experience the pleasure of giving and the vulnerability of receiving. So you're not just going through the motions, you're actively engaging in each other's pleasure. And part of what Josh realized during that Saturday morning conversation was that he'd been touching Elizabeth in the exact same way, in the same order for years. Same kiss, same breast touch, same progression. No wonder she seemed bored. He'd been boring. And look, routines can be comfortable, but when physical foreplay becomes so predictable that you could literally do it while making the grocery list in your head, something's wrong. Mixing it up doesn't mean you have to become an acrobat or have a bunch of toys, though if that interests you, that's great. It just means staying curious and playful. What happens if you start with something different? What if you engage a sense that you usually ignore? What if you try that thing that you've been curious about but felt too awkward to suggest? So for Elizabeth and Josh, one simple change made a huge difference. Elizabeth suggested they try incorporating different music. One night she put on something slow and sensual, another night something with a faster beat. The different soundscapes changed the entire mood and pacing of their physical foreplay. It was such a simple shift, but it made everything feel new. And they also started paying attention to different types of touch, featherlight touches, firmer pressure, different temperatures, different textures. So when you engage multiple sensory experiences, you're giving your nervous system more input to process, which can heighten arousal. And they experimented with variety in when and where they engaged in physical foreplay. Not every sexual encounter had to start in bed at 10 p.m. What about mornings, afternoons, spontaneous moments that weren't planned? When they broke their routine, they interrupted the autopilot and created space for genuine presence. These changes didn't happen overnight. Elizabeth and Josh worked on all of this over months. The all day connection, the five types of foreplay, slowing down physically, reading each other's signals, both pursuing giving and receiving, keeping things varied. And as they did, something deeper shifted between them. So we've talked about all of these different things, but what is this all actually creating? Better foreplay isn't ultimately about techniques and tricks. It's about building connection and desire between two people who genuinely want each other and care about each other's experiences. When Elizabeth and Josh started implementing these changes, the most significant shift wasn't in what they were doing physically, it was how they felt about each other. Elizabeth felt pursued, desired, seen as a whole person rather than just a body. Josh felt like his desire for Elizabeth mattered, like she wanted him too, like they were in this together. That's what happens when you stop treating foreplay like a mandatory warm up and start treating it like an essential part of your sexual and relational connection. You create an atmosphere where both people's desires are valid and matter, where pleasure isn't rushed but savored, where variety and curiosity keep things interesting, where both people actively pursue each other instead of one person doing all the work. Your foreplay patterns reveal what you believe about sex and connection in your marriage. If you're rushing, you're saying the goal matters more than the journey. If you're doing the same thing every time, you're saying comfort matters more than growth. If one person is always initiating, you're saying one person's desires matter more than the others. But when you slow down, when you stay curious, when you pursue each other, when you engage all five types of foreplay throughout your day, when you read the room and adjust what's actually happening, you're saying, you matter. Your pleasure matters. Our connection matters. The intimate part of our marriage deserves our attention and creativity and care, not just intercourse matters. That's what better foreplay looks like. Not a longer checklist before sex, but a complete shift in how you approach desire, connection, and pleasure with your spouse. All right, my friends, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me. Remember, love is a journey, not a destination. Stay committed, stay passionate, and stay connected. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.